Hey everybody, welcome. It's funny, I have a topic in mind for today's walk and talk, one that's been brewing for a few days after an unexpected experience in the garden. An experience that was in its way quite pleasant, and yet also quite dangerous. But that topic will await another time, because I'm just not feeling the mood that goes with a topic so fraught with darkness and peril. And I'm feeling a bit brighter and more buoyant. So, one of my favorite problems in terms of our relationship with knowledge and I've mentioned it before and I've made videos about it before, is could be framed with the words, but no one knows what anything is. Now, we can't be certain of this. There are prodigies and sages and children and animals and insects and trees and such, and stars and planets and worlds, and it's possible that among the seemingly infinite populations of beings and situations, that someone or something actually might know, at least more clearly than we common humans do, what something is or what stuff is. But, and this is the problem in philosophy of what we might call ontology, the whatness of things, what things are, and then its sort of partner, epistemology. How do we know things? How do we know what we know? So ontology and epistemology seem to be married. In that the stuff we refer to as justified true belief is oriented in these two perspectives. And that's a well-known, aspect of the philosophy of knowledge. And I just mention these words not to be showing off or anything, but just so that people can become, who are listeners, can become familiar with them. Ontology is sort of the whatness of things, and it can be defined much more carefully. I'm being casual. And epistemology is how do we know things? And what qualifies as justified true belief or something similar? Knowledge. What qualifies as knowledge? And how does it qualify? Yet, all of the forms we have are provisional because we're stuck as human beings in a weird conundrum. A land of tokens and maps, artifacts and representations. And by tokens, I mean things like words. So we have the word the sun. And I remember as a child asking my father what the sun is, and he began to explain that it was a giant nuclear explosion in space. And then he talked to me about radiation and such, and how it causes cancer and the degeneration of cells, and I became utterly terrified. Of course, I was only 4 or something. That the sun was going to kill everything, and everything would die of cancer from the radiation. But of course, the sun isn't a nuclear explosion. And even if we say, well, it's a fusion event, that doesn't help us, right? Because the meaning of words depend on other words, right? The dictionary, in the dictionary, the definitions of words are filled with other words, which themselves have definitions. And in point of fact, we don't know the first thing about anything. And by the first thing, I mean the most essential thing, right? So we're in this conundrum of not knowing what anything is, and yet existing and passing through our lives as though we do know things, and we do know what they are. Now, there's different kinds of knowledge, of course. There is the experiential knowledge that one has when kissing one's beloved, or, having a snake wrapping around one's arm, or having a conversation with a spider in one's mind, or tasting food, or feeling the pain of an injury, or being sick, or having a dream. These things we know sort of firsthand, but we don't know what a dream is. And we don't know what food is, though, again, we have elaborate lexicons of tokens and maps and relationships and constellated models and explanations, which literally means to flatten things. That plan, right? The plan, it means flat. It's taken from the word plane. Plane. So we have this problem where we really don't know the first thing about anything. And again, though we have experiential knowledge, the kind of knowledge that we seek, that we're sort of after in the aspects of our minds that deal with abstractions and identity and meaning, these things are all placeholders. And what are they placeholders for? They're placeholders for something more accurate. It seems unlikely that anything could be infinitely accurate and thus perfectly true, because perfect truth would have to have infinite precision, right? And that would mean regression into a cascade of recursive, ever closer approaches to perfect exactness and truth. And anything like that would probably be very dangerous to our minds, because it would have a sort of cognitive gravity that might resemble that of a black hole. And that doesn't mean it wouldn't be good or amazing or interesting, but it might be extremely difficult to ever escape it, to have anything to say about the results of having encountered something like this, or having conceived of something like this within consciousness. Now, consciousness, within which we must imagine knowledge exists, has certain qualities and features, characteristics, limitations, functions, sort of what we might think of as applications, actually. And these vary widely, but most of them are purposefully limited, because if we were to become so fascinated with the pursuit of identity or meaning or the essence of things that we became insensate, we would die, right? So that if there were people who were once like that, they probably didn't survive very well, because they just went into trance, a trance from which they never recovered, and they starved to death and didn't mate or do any of those things because they had no interest in those things. The compulsion of the ecstasy of perfect knowledge would have exterminated them, at least in the story that I'm telling at the moment, in one version of the story. And yet, we as human beings do have the deep motivation to learn and to discover what is going on, what things are, presuming, of course, that there are things, or that something's going on. Now, there are, of course, philosophical and perhaps religious traditions that ask us to consider whether or not it might be that there's nothing going on and that there are no things. This is going to be a very ironic discussion for a moment. The idea of emptiness in Buddhism, and perhaps particularly in Zen, might be, first of all, is probably considered impossible to communicate clearly about in ordinary language. Though there are mondos between Zen teachers and students and such, often very puzzling to insiders and outsiders, that play around with the peculiar notness of nothingness. What can I say about this? It seems likely to me that there's something to all of this stuff. Likely enough that I've been a student of Zen traditions for about 30 years, and a fairly committed one. However, what I have discovered wouldn't wouldn't take up a thimble, or even fill the eye of a needle, even a very small needle. And it's somewhat ironic to try to talk about, because these traditions have something to do with cutting through the conceptual mind, the mind of ideas, the mind of language. And by cutting through, I mean something like both exiting it, so that whatever one might be can see from outside of that, or can experience from outside of that, except that seeing and experiencing aren't really what's happening there, supposedly. And I know little about that, for I have never truly pierced the veil, so to speak. Though I've toyed with the veil in very intimate ways, with the help of some uncommon companions. So, when I use the phrase, no one knows what anything is, What I mean is, the fundamental questions remain highly charged and nearly completely unanswered. What we have standing in the place of answers for these questions are very provisional constructs, language, concepts, ideas that are essentially made up. They're make-believe. And they're the kind of make-believe that comes from the left hemisphere's desire to name and map and explain and make models and systems and so on. Right? Here's the Cooper's hawk. Now, this is the problem, right here. What is the Cooper's hawk? What is the tree? What is my mind? What is asking the question? What is light? Why are we born? What is time? What is space? What is distance? What does separation mean? Where does it come from? Why is it there? Is it there? If it's not there, why does it seem to be there? What are minds? What is dreaming? What are organisms? Why are there living worlds? Is the speed of light a speed? What do the discoveries of physics mean? Where do they come from? Why are there stars? What is the nature? What is the essential nature and meaning, character, activity of the universe? Now, I fired off a bunch of questions in a short burst of cataloging. But what I want to make clear is we don't know the first thing about any of these things. The fact that we have something resembling mechanical measurements of light tells us nothing about its nature. And, as many people famously asked, what's the speed of darkness? The one, I guess, who I remember asking it, or who I first saw ask it, was probably Laurie Anderson. An astonishingly hyper intelligent, creative human being. So, I mention these questions not just to boggle our minds with them, but for a number of important reasons, including that each one of them absolutely fascinates me. Like most of us, I grew up taking for granted, at least in the beginning, that the adults knew what was going on because that was, the story at play. So I thought, of course the adults know what things are. When my father told me what, his description of the sun, my father at that point, and me being 4 years old, was essentially a god. So my father knew everything there was to know, and whatever he told me, whether or not I could clearly understand it, I certainly believed to be the truth. The truth, not a truth. And so the only things that we mortals ordinarily experience as knowledge, and again, I'm not talking about the experiential knowledge of the scent of this wonderful sage plant. Oh my God, that scent. It's so... it's just so compelling, so visceral. I love it. But the knowledge that we think of when we think of the meanings of our tokens, right? Light, time, birth, death, mind, dream, consciousness, awareness. So when I'm speaking of us not knowing about things, I'm talking about this kind of knowledge. Abstract knowledge, conceptual knowledge. There is a better description of what light is than anything humans have ever come up with. And some humans may have come up with it and it didn't spread, it just didn't catch on. And that may be because, well, there's all kinds of reasons why that might be so. In some cases, someone fascinated with physics might have discovered something about light that would destroy science utterly, right? That wouldn't catch on because nobody would, let's say the existing cohorts would not allow the sudden destruction of the entire discipline by a discovery so earth-shattering that it would destroy the meaning of every other model that we have, and yet that's precisely the kind of discovery I'm talking about. We are capable as individual human beings of making discoveries of this kind. We are highly motivated to do so under the right conditions, and it becomes much more likely and possible when we form groups who conserve together the urgent necessity of pursuing these questions. Though lots of dangers ensue from that as well, particularly the dangers of cults, religions, parafascistic knowledge systems, things like this. Nonetheless, what I'm trying to get at is the knowledge that we have as humans, the knowledge that we can find in books, the knowledge that we are taught in schools, the systematic forms of knowledge that comprise the discoveries and models and presentations of science and scientific language. All of these things, compared to the phenomena they frame, are so incredibly crude that even in their apparent technological advancement circa 2021 AD, they are cataclysmically primitive. Whatever light actually is and is doing, if we knew the first thing about it, it would change everything that we know about all other things. Light is a holophore. In order to know about stuff at all, you have to have ideas about light. The world, similarly, is a holophore. So too the sun. No sun, no world. No world, no minds. No minds, no language. No concepts, no models, no science, no religion, and so on. So there are these root concepts in our lexicons that I call holophores. It's a neologism I invented, again, with the help of a non-human companion who took me to the roots of my lexical intelligence and showed me around the basement down there and the structures that hold up the rest of the constructs. If whatever we might discover about light or time would radically transform everything we know about everything else. And so, similarly, if these concepts over time become damaged by some activity, and both science and religion are fully capable of causing this kind of damage, so too is technology. Because over time, ideas that once had meaning that was so broad and deep and rich that only the dreaming mind could possibly hold it within its cup. Because in the dreaming mind, meaning and identity are both partly structured, and yet in their incompleteness, more robust than what we play with while awake, because their incompletenesses form suggestions, right? Not declarations, possibilities. And the dreaming mind can sustain many of these possibilities at once, so that our experience of identity in dreaming, presuming that we have experience in dreaming and so on, is so much richer than what we have when we're ordinarily awake, that the only thing we usually have while awake, unless we're in some kind of uncommon ecstatic or visionary state that resembles it, is psychedelic experience. And psychedelic experience only resembles it in a very limited kind of way. Because the dreaming mind is free in ways that the most psychedelic experiences are not, right? They are structured by the sort of enforced continuity of psychedelia brought on by the experience of the substance that's imbibed or whatever taken. The substance one falls under the influence of. That substance enforces a certain intensity and constancy of intensity of experience over the span of such experience. Whereas dreaming is much more malleable and what's the right word? Diverse in its potential and actual embodiments. Yeah. And what I'm trying to get at is that in dreaming we have experiences of the meaning of identity whose dimensionality is far greater than that we ordinarily will have while awake. There are some exceptions. Those exceptions are uncommon, and most of our language about them is crude or confusing. For example, one might speak of magical experience, and this word, without defining it more more specifically, is mostly just confusing. What does one mean by this? Does one mean like ritual magic, or does one mean magical in the sense of like fantastic and otherworldly? And of course I am the one speaking, so I am the one meaning things, but I mean the whole spectrum of possibility of such experiences. So all of the definition. I'm using the word very generally. I will never, unless my mind collapses or is destroyed somehow, I will never give up the questions in that list. I need to know them the way I hunger for food or adventure or love or dreaming. I need to know what was I before I was born? What came together to become me, and why? Why are there minds? Why are there humans? Why are humans such bizarre animals when we compare them with the rest of the biosphere? What's our problem with technology that's destroying everything, including our own minds? What is light? What is time? Why are there stars? What happens when we die? Is there something we need to accomplish while we're alive that is imperative? If so, what is it and why? Are there other intelligences besides our own near at hand or contactable? Are they physical intelligences like ours? Are they metaphysical intelligences that preside over the sort of sum of the possibilities of time-space? All of these things I'm starving to know. And I want direct experience of them. I'm not interested in having answers, presented to me in books and things, though I'm happy to explore books and things. I need to know firsthand what the answers are. I need to have the experiences that unlock insight into the nature of these questions and the minds that entertain them. And I've always been this way, or at least I've always been so curious, so passionately curious, that even though I couldn't maybe frame these questions when I was younger, they were pulsing in the anatomy of my consciousness, right, underneath the surface, not yet risen into consciousness even when I was a child, right? What is language? Why do humans have formal, structured, representational thought? I mean, are any other animals doing something like that? And if so, why? Where does it come from? What is it doing? What are the things and or beings, that our living world is the repercussive expression of, in the same way that the reflections on the surface of a body of water are the repercussive reflections of light on the structured and living matter around them, right? What is the world a mirror of? What is reflected in the form and intelligences here? And what would it be to experience that directly rather than indirectly through these reflections? These questions burn in my heart, and I am in love with them. I can never set them down. Even in the moments of illness or darkness or despair or, crisis, these questions always are with me. And I've had some experience of piercing the veil of human abstract knowledge and seeing from beyond it. And the only thing I can say is that whatever's out there is so explosively, ecstatically beautiful that were we to be suddenly exposed to the fury of its beauty, we would be annihilated. And it is layered, right? So that you don't have to just be exposed to the fury and be annihilated or live in ignorance. You can kind of climb the ladder of layers toward annihilation without being obliterated yet, and gain deeper and more trustworthy perspectives and insights. There again is the Cooper's hawk, though you probably can't see the bird. And what is that a reflection of? What is the metalogue that the Cooper's hawk is the analog in embodied matter of? I want to know, I need to know. And so I have these questions, and I recognize that what we have mostly as humans is toys. We have these very crude placeholders that are inherited. This is part of what Alfred Korzybski calls time binding, in that we pass along these tokens from generation to generation, and the rubric of their commonly presumptive meanings and relationships with each other. And we call this knowledge. And yet, to call it imperfect is the grossest kind of misbehavior, because it's like the remnants of a photograph hit with a shotgun blast. And instead of having seen the photograph or the subject of the photograph, what we see are the patterns in the remaining material between the holes, right? And we take these patterns for meaningful knowledge, and are thus deceived by the very substrate upon which our intellects depend. We might say that the beginning of knowledge is the recognition that we don't know the first thing about what anything is. Because if we start there, at least we won't begin by believing the blinding statuary of the conceptual and linguistic and lexical transmissions of our ancestors. We can make use of them without believing them, but we should begin by disbelieving them, because honestly, they tell us nothing about what light is or what time is. And in fact, we each have the capacity to see far beyond anything that we inherit, in part because the not yet structured aspects of our cognitive capacities exceed the entire library of structure we can inherit from mankind. And there are other intelligences in the universe that under the right conditions will lead us and teach us. Some of those conditions are extremely dangerous and fraught with great peril. others of them are extremely ecstatic and fraught with great peril. It's hard to say whether any of them are safe, but discovery and safety are not necessarily consonant and harmonious with each other. So we may have to take unusual risks if we are compelled to pierce the veil of the conceptual and cognitive and linguistic knowledge we inherit and see both into its origins and beyond it toward visions that are more true, more trustworthy, and more accurate without being perfectly true, trustworthy, or accurate. And those visions are usually they are manifolds, right? They are not singular perspectives. To understand what light is, you need to have 7 different perspectives that are unique and inform each other, that you can play, not just 7, of course, but I use this number on purpose nonetheless. You need to have a variety of different perspectives that simultaneously inform the process of your travel beyond them to what we might think of as the next rung of insight, right? Or a further rung of insight, or ring of insight. And thus, in one sense, the shape of knowledge isn't an arrow, it's a sphere made of wheels within wheels. Or something like this. So, this is my inspiration for today. The great questions of our existence. And I preserve them in my heart. And I always will. And I hope that perhaps you may find this walk and talk inspiring and resonant with something deep within yourself, that you too can chase and pursue in a kind of sacred lemniscate. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon.